No, they're not. I haven't seen one for kids. Tomorrow.
Why is that? Oh, I guess that's like home, right?
Yeah.
They're now. Is that part of, is that reservation right there?
No, but they're her mom and brother and sister at that same cemetery. So.
Yes, mother, mom.
Right.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Welcome to week 5. Today we're going to be talking about basically human nature. So theology has something to say about that. We're going to go through it. It's really interesting to me. Next week we're going to be talking about faith. So I've got the next 2 weeks, the helm anyway. So somebody had volunteered to pray this morning to open us up. Would you be willing to do that?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Lord, thank you today that for us, and I thank you that you put things together so that we can understand and that even though we don't think about it, you answer our questions and help us understand what's going on today with the messages. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, let me ask a question as we get started. What is our human nature?
Sin.
What's it like? Well, we're going to talk about sin, but it is. It's
full of sin.
It's full of sin. Well, what is our basic human? Let's just say a brand new spanking baby is born, and you're in the hospital. You're going to see him. What is their nature?
Their need.
Their needs. They're self-centered. Hey, sounds you're starting to talk about me. Anyway. All right. So self-nature or self-centered, babies want what they want. In fact, we're going to cover that in a minute because I've heard people say, and if you read anything by Dr. Spock, you'll see that it says that babies are born innocent. They're blank slates. No, they're not. And I have 7. I can say that with some authority. So let's take a look at this verse right here. Actually, this isn't the verse yet, is it? Western culture, Enlightenment doctrine states this: human nature is basically good. So based on our first part of the conversation, is that true? No, it's not. It's not. And I wish that it were true because life would be so much easier, wouldn't it? What do we see going on in the world around us today? What's that? Chaos. Anybody else? What do you see going around in the world today, boys?
Perfect obedience to God.
What's that? You're being sarcastic. Okay.
Perfect obedience to God.
Perfect obedience to God. Now, that is definitely sarcasm. What does this verse say? Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. Just 9. We're not even going into 10 so much, but verse 9, what does it say? And I tend to quote this in the King James because that's the way I learned it. The heart is desperately wicked. Here it says, because it's in the ESV, the heart is deceitful above all things. The heart is desperately wicked. That's the way I learned it. Who can know it? The heart is deceitful above all else and desperately sick. Who can know it? Now, Jeremiah gets this all the way back before the New Testament comes on the scene, before Jesus is born to Mary in Bethlehem, before Jesus walks on the earth and teaches the disciples. Jeremiah understands this. Have you ever gone through life and you've done something, whatever it may be, nobody has to confess anything, and you go, why on earth did I do that? You ever done that? Why? Why do we do that?
The good that we want to do is outweigh the bad that we don't want to do.
Ooh, that sounds like Paul talking from Romans. What does Paul say? He says the very things that I would do, the things I know that are good, that are right, that are the things I should be doing, what? I don't do them. And those things that I know I should do, the very good things that I should be doing, that I should be walking in the Spirit, flowing, being that living sacrifice that he mentions there as well, those are the very things that I do not. And he goes on in another passage, he says, now we see as through a mirror darkly, and he's talking about this is in the same passage of verses, but then, and he's talking about when he comes into the presence of Jesus, then face to face. Well, there's hope, right? Anybody here looking forward to hope?
Yeah.
I'm looking hard for hope. I don't know who's digging me.
Somebody that wanted to have hope.
Tom's cold. Anyway,
You know, I said
So-
that like 5 minutes ago.
yeah. Mine's a little slow. So we're talking about human nature. Basic human nature states that, well, human doctrine, current doctrine in the West says that basic human nature is great, right? We know that it's not. We've already talked about that. Is it true that human nature is basically good? We've already discussed that. The answer is no. Here's something the psalmist said. What is it that, and I think this was David who wrote this, I haven't gone to look to verify, but Psalm 51 and verse 10 says what? Create in me a what? Clean heart or a clean spirit, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. What is he acknowledging? He's acknowledging that he doesn't have a wrong heart. There's sin.
Yeah.
That he's broken. One of the things in theology as we study, and this is something we should be doing as part of our discipleship, is understanding our own human nature, but also understanding the nature of God. Because God is eternally good. God is eternally perfect. When he made creation, how was it? On day 6, before he went to rest on day 7, he said, hey, everything is very good. That translation is as close to perfect as you can get. It was perfect. Adam and Eve had everything that they could possibly need. They had the perfect bodies to do whatever they wanted to with. They were running around the garden naked.
Shame.
No shame. It was perfect. And then what happened? That woman you did, Adam says. No. And so we have to be careful about that too, because Adam was in the wrong as well. He didn't stop him.
Well, he blamed God because
And he blamed God.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna ask when I get there where the emphasis on was. The emphasis on the woman
Yeah.
or the woman that you
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
God.
Exactly. And so I find that interesting, funny actually, as we look at all of that and we're going through life and we're worried about all of the things going on. Anyone here have a stress day to day? Am I the only one? Any day. Any day is stressful, but why is it stressful?
Because we're trying to take it up on our own.
Because we're trying to do it ourselves. We're self-centered, just like those babies who are born. We're self-centered. We're doing that. And because the world is broken because of sin, right? So when we're studying this and we're taking a look, our answers to everything comes from one place. Where's that? From God, the Word of God. The answers are all there. Our answers to our stress are there. The answers to the bad things going on in our lives are there. All of that's there. But how often do we turn to and trust God versus lean on our own understanding?
Too much.
Too much.
Jody said always.
Jody says always, and I agree with him.
He's got a big
So-
smile that's working in his face too.
Now, remember, hey, Jody, do you remember when we talked about how when babies are born that they're not perfect? Here's the next verse. You can listen because I'm going to say this out loud. Folly, or again in the King James, it says foolishness, is bound in the heart of a child. What? But the rod of correction will drive it far from him. If you look at another verse in Proverbs, it says God disciplines those he what? Love. Parents discipline their children because why? They love us. When we're stressed out sometimes because we become self-centered, and I confess I do it more often than I care to admit, what happens? If you belong to him, what happens?
Get all messed up, man.
He will bring you back in line. He will whip your tail. He will spank you, discipline you, bring you back in line. Why?
He loves us.
Because he loves us. Now, stress in my life comes a lot of times because things don't go the way that I want to. Why? Because I'm self-centered sometimes. But I have a plan, right? I will go out and I will plan my day. I'll put it on my calendar. I will do certain things that I'll work on for weeks before I'm ready to deliver that stuff. And then in the middle of all of that, somebody else comes along and they go, you know what? I thought better of that. Let's do this instead. All of that hard work that I've done, all of that planning that I've made, I'm a linear human being like most men are. What happens?
Start over, man.
You got to start over. And what is your attitude about it generally?
Frustrated.
You get mad, you get frustrated.
Isn't it
So-
because of a lack of understanding and
It can be.
maybe because basically if you were to understand like that situation, there's another reason for there to be a change.
Yes.
You'd be like, oh, fine.
Well, and sometimes,
We don't ever get the full information.
Honestly, I find that I typically have a lot of lack of understanding because I didn't pause, break, water, proceed.
Yeah, not.
But I get impatient and I just want to go and I don't think through, well, if I do this and this is going to happen, if I do it again. Learned that from Arlen doing this AV stuff where I'm like, I just wanted to go and like, well,
Yeah.
I just hooked up 5 things. I don't know which one doesn't work.
right? Here's what happens to me typically. Like I said, I tend to be very structured as far as planning ahead for things. And so I'll be working on something. But here's the thing that I have to consider as well. What is God's plan versus my plan? See what I'm saying? God's plan is perfect, and he's got something that he wants me to either research or learn. And I will confess to you this morning, I am being spoken to as I'm speaking to you. Okay? Why? Because that's the way God works. Any pastor who is up there who is actually in the Spirit of God and preaching from the heart, they are learning, they are up there cringing, they are going, oh, this is beating me up too. When they're preaching to you, you're getting about a quarter of what they do typically. They're getting beat up hard. Well, why? Because they're trying to be tuned into God and listen, because our basic sin nature, our self-centeredness is warring with us. The old man wars with the new man. You know that, right? So that's what human nature and sin is all about. We're going to cover more about sin in just a moment. Western culture is being pushed by satanic ideology, first of all, but also by Marxist ideology, which I believe came from Satan himself. But what does it say? If you listen to the young men and women of our universities out there that are going to school, you're going to hear them say, well, the only problem with the human condition is that everybody is at an economic disadvantage. If we could just take all of those billionaires and give their money out to everybody else and everybody was the same, it'd all be great, right?
Why aren't the billionaires happy?
Exactly. Why aren't the billionaires happy?
But it's also
Go
not
ahead.
so much, it's because of everybody else's sin that it's not things like ideals will not work. I mean, it may look good on paper.
Yep.
And it might be good to share with your family and your neighbors, and we do that on a small scale. We do practice some sort of socialism,
Yeah.
but on a large, but that's because even with people we don't trust, and they tend to hurt us, and we're like, well, I don't know what to do next. But on a larger scale, yeah, it doesn't. Because of sin, or
Because of sin.
the imperfection of man.
And what is an ideology, or whether it's political, social, whatever? It's man trying to figure out a way to do it on our own without God. And I don't. It doesn't really matter what ideology is. It could be Marx, Kant, Hume,
Well, even
whoever,
capitalism,
they're, yeah,
problems.
well, yeah, and
Oh, yeah.
the thing that, oh, well, if your economics are right, you'd be all better. Well, you apparently haven't studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because that's not the case. You're gonna
Well,
find
there's a
out
problem with any human theory or hypothesis.
it's if
It's the human.
it's all the enemy sneaking in and saying, "Hey, go look at this instead of looking at God. Go look over here.
Yep,
Look over
exactly.
here. No, look over here."
You know, like Corey and I were talking about it, and like Elva, like she really like she got me pondering, praying, processing all that deal. Like her statement last week about it's just simple, and or whatever she said, and I'm like, I mean, I thought about that, and I'm like, knowing the difference of when to be simple and concise and when to go deep is a challenge. But I guess what I started laughing about, like probably Thursday, was something I said years ago at church that goes here. The guy thought I was being silly, but to me, it's human nature. We like what we like, and we don't like what we don't like. It's that stinking simple. Like, and that's what it causes because, like, socialism on one side, when you're in a certain state of mind, doesn't that sound great? Like we all have money to spend. We all have this. We all share. We all do that kind of stuff. But it was demonstrated to me years ago. If you're in a class, right, and you've studied hard, you've worked hard, you put the time in, and you get an A, and then the 5 people that are in your class who didn't study, they've been a waste of space. They're there, right, and they get a D. But the professor comes in and says, you know what, like we all were good. We all put a different degree. I'm giving everybody an A. What is the first thing your mind screams? That's not fair. So human nature is back to your first thing.
The example of that, and let's twist it around. Let's use the biblical example, talking about the workers. The first one who comes at the beginning of the day is getting paid however much, $5 an hour, let's say. Okay, in today's economy, that wouldn't work. But then someone who comes and they're spending the last 15 minutes, they get $5 too.
What do you scream?
It's not fair. Exactly. And see, that's what. Go ahead. He didn't work an hour. Exactly. Everybody sees that it's not fair. But you know what Jesus said? He says, what is it to you what I pay him? Because that's between me and him, not you and him. And he's talking about there, the euphemism that he's using, or the example he's using, is talking about salvation, the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't matter if someone is a mass murderer. If they come to Christ at the end of their life, what do they get? Salvation. And they get to come to heaven, just like all of us who have worked hard and tried to do the right thing and done all of this. So it doesn't matter. I know people who have murdered other people who I sincerely believe are believers. Believers. Okay. So we get that. Double the words. But that person learned from what happened in their life. And God was merciful and gracious to them. And that's awesome.
You don't realize how divisive that is, because I've talked to people over the years,
Yeah.
Since high school, about that concept.
Right.
Naming individuals that would be like, oh no, yeah, he's not in heaven. There's just no way.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, how do you know?
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know.
And they're like, I can't. And it shakes their faith so much that they have a hard time like accepting that as a truth.
Why do they have a hard time accepting that?
It's not that.
It's not fair, but we're basing it on the human condition in our perception of the world as human beings. It's human nature, right? We're not basing it on God's economy and what God says. Because Paul spells it out. I'm sorry?
God sees all sin as sin.
Well, sin is sin. And it doesn't matter if it's homosexuality, if it's murder, if it's rape, if it's adultery. It doesn't matter. Sin is sin.
Stealing or lying or something.
And lying, stealing that piece of candy that I did when I was 6 or 7 years old is just as bad as if I'd gone out and murdered somebody on the street side. Now, human nature doesn't see it as the same, but a sin is a sin. Yeah, you didn't know I stole something when I was little, did you?
It's even shifting the words.
I never knew you
Yeah.
were.
Do you remember the Brock's candy displays that used to be at the grocery stores?
No.
I remember to this day, I wanted a piece of caramel so bad, and my mom had told me no. I went in and grabbed that piece of caramel, stuck it in my pocket, walked out. Now, How much was that piece of caramel worth? What's the answer? The answer is it doesn't matter.
That's that.
Sin is sin. Theft is theft.
Stole it.
I coveted that piece of candy and it led to me stealing it. And later on, I ate it. I still remember that taste in my mouth to this day, but I remember the shame of the situation as I get older and realize what I'd done. Was I innocent? No.
How old were you?
I was about 5 or 6. Doesn't matter. I wasn't innocent. I knew.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
The other theological aspect is just how young.
Well, yes, and I understand that accountability happens at a certain age where you come to an age of understanding. I was old enough to know better, so I was wrong.
Hey, I ate it before I left the store. Is that better?
There you go.
I didn't take it out of the store.
What man considers an agent of understanding or not, the good thing is that God's grace is big enough to cover it all.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And
Did you hear what he said? Whether we're at the age of accountability or not, God's grace is big enough to carry it, cover it. And it absolutely is true. So here's something that G.K. Chesterton said. Some of you may know who he is. He was a guy back in the wild. Anyway, he says this. He said, human depravity is the one Christian doctrine that can really be proven. Would you agree or disagree? I would agree.
Yeah.
He's absolutely correct. So take a look again at Jeremiah 17:9, right? The heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? So, all right. I had some slides that I skipped, so we're going to keep on going. So what is the problem?
Sin.
Sin is the problem. Sin, and it doesn't matter what sin it is, whether it's covetousness, adultery, murder, whatever. If God says don't do it,
Don't do it.
don't do it because it's wrong. And sin is the one thing. And here's the thing. How much damage did the original sin do? A lot, as in how much? Total, as in, give me an example of something that sin caused, because I'm going to give you one here in just a moment. The earth isn't the same. Why? It's cursed. We got thorns and we have goat heads. You know that's that's a cause of the curse, right? Goat heads.
I can prove they had goats. They didn't have goat heads in the garden. They didn't wear shoes.
They were naked, yeah. Running through the garden doing whatever. They didn't
Or they
step
did
on those
step
goat
on
heads,
them
or you
too.
would have heard other curse words earlier on. Anyway, no, I'm kidding. So we know that that's a result of the curse. What else happened that's a result of the curse? Because of sin. Separation from God. Death. There you go. That was the one I was looking for. But there's more than just that. Did you know that every supernova out there, that asteroids that have come through and possibly hit the earth in the past, all of that is a result of sin? Because of one man's sin, death came to the earth, and death comes in many different ways, but it also destroyed the earth. Why was the flood?
That's
Sin.
sin. Yeah. They didn't.
Because they were marrying and giving in marriage, and they were partying, and they were doing all the things, and the entire thoughts of mankind, Genesis chapter 6, was desperately wicked. All they thought about continually was wickedness.
So the interesting thing is because generally we think of wickedness as something apart from us that we don't do on a regular basis. We think of it as hurting people, stealing all the time, all these things, crimes. We'll think of them as crimes. And generally we feel like we can be less or not even wicked because we don't do those things. So we have a hard time understanding what wickedness is.
Yep.
Because even if you're in a perfect society that's rule oriented and all this stuff and everybody's following the laws and they're respecting each other, are you not wicked?
As you were saying that, that verse in James came to mind where he says that it's your own desires that when they come to fruition, wicked acts. and it's not worded that way, but it's not coming from anywhere else. It's not God tempting us. It's not Satan tempting. We have those desires all by ourselves because of sin, and it's part of our sin nature.
I wanted to know what meant. Where does that word come from?
Anything that you do that is opposed to what God has told you to do.
Right. Well, what I found is that it's a Greek word for missing the mark,
Yes.
and that's what they use in archery.
Yeah.
So every time you aim for something and you don't hit it,
Yeah.
you've sinned.
Yeah.
And that it
You've missed the mark.
opened up my.
It's hard to hit that mark too every time consistently.
Yeah. So I mean, I was innocent. I mean, necessarily in my mind, I
Right.
wasn't doing something wrong. The fact that I wasn't able to do something still sin.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that changed my perspective of what we consider good and evil, on this plane on our human understanding. Is that in God's eyes, it's not just that, it's also the fact that you're not able to hit that mark that
Right.
He wants us to hit. I mean, we can try to achieve it, and we live our lives practicing trying to hit that mark, but we'll never ever get that.
Right.
So we can never. I mean, the mistake a lot of like Catholics, what I came out of, my family came out of. It's too young to remember a lot of that stuff, but I do see a lot of the residual influence over the area and understand some of it. But it's basically the idea of we can change. We can closer we get to that mark, we're improving our chances of getting into heaven.
Well, even our good deeds he sees them as filthy rags.
Right.
And there's a translation of that means something other than what you may think. So let's just leave that there. Crime, murder, violence, terrorism, sexual immorality, adultery, drugs, Hollywood.
Put it on that TV too and feed it to us,
Everything
man.
on
You see
that.
those commercials and stuff.
None of those are really,
And do we change the channel? Stuff comes on.
none of those are really the problem though. Did you know that? They're a symptom of the problem. It's because of our separation from God, our not following through. And as a result of our not following through, we don't change the channel.
And capitalism is a very interesting barometer for sin, because it wouldn't be on the screen if somebody didn't want to see it,
Exactly.
because it's all about making money. And if people are not buying into it and producing money, then it's going to go away. So where's your earmark for sin? We can see what sin is in our culture just by watching TV.
Yeah. Turn it off. Leave it off.
Yeah.
Even if there's nothing on it.
Most people in the world, and here in the book he said in the West, but in the world, most people don't want anything to do with morality. Why? Do you know why? Well, because they're not moral, you're absolutely correct. But why? Why do some people just absolutely not want anything to do with it?
They don't want to be accountable.
They don't want to be accountable. They don't want somebody to tell them what's right and what's wrong. Accountability, it really boils down to that. So the infection of determinism, which is basically knowing you have an illness but not doing anything about it, it's killing us. We know what's wrong. The world knows what's wrong. It's instinctive. Romans chapter 1, they know. You can't deny that there is a God. You can't deny right and wrong. You know you're not supposed to do these things. But it's killing us. Sin literally is. And here's an example. When you get sick, and it's not a normal cold or a virus or something like that, what do? You go to the doctor. Okay. So you're going to go to the doctor. Why?
Heal you.
Because he can give you something that can heal you. He's first of all going to do what? He's going to diagnose you, right? He's going to figure out what's wrong. Now, let's say the doctor has gone in and he's figured out what's wrong with you. He's got these little magic pills over here. Maybe they're whatever. penicillin, whatever it might be. And he's going to give you these and it's going to cure you of whatever it is. You go see the doctor and he says, this is your illness. This is what will cure it. And you tell him, I'm not going to take those pills. It happens a lot. Why? I don't want you to tell me what's right and wrong. I don't want you to, and I've told my doctor, I don't want any more pills. But it's stuff that I could change my lifestyle and get better at and not have to take those pills.
So can I
Go ahead.
use what you said as a little bit
Yes.
of a word study as an example? You look at the law versus grace. All the sacrifices and rituals and stuff that we do in religion treat symptoms of the sin. It doesn't cure it. Medicine doesn't cure it. It treats the symptoms.
Yep.
And ultimately God's design cures it.
You're right.
And I thought of that actually, like, we try to find all this stuff to treat our sinful symptoms on our own, but if we do it God's way and grace, that's the cure. Once it's cured, you're good.
So you're right. Your body does the healing because it's God's design ultimately. Sometimes we can use that earthly medicine to help us get there. But if we reject the diagnosis, we don't listen to the doctor and we don't take the medicine, then we're not going to get better.
Why'd you even go?
So sin is like that. Sin is one of two things. Number one, it is the failure to do or not do something. Sin is the failure to do or not do something. In other words, I've gone and done something I know I shouldn't have done. So that is an act of commission. I've gone and done it. Then there are those things that I know I should do, but I'm not doing them. That is the sin of omission. In other words, I should have done something and I didn't. I've left it out. That's what omission means. Commission means I did it. Omission means I left it out. So one is sin. So here's an example I give a lot when I preach. Let's say that you have these teenagers at home and you've said to them, hey, I need you to go take the trash out. Oh, I'll get to it in a little bit. And they never take the trash out. What is that?
Sin.
It's sin because you as an adult, their parent, have been given authority over them to tell them what to do. God has given you that authority, biblical authority as a parent, and they don't do it. It's a sin. Let me give you an even tougher one. God is prompting you. You have seen something wrong with your neighbor, your friend, your whatever, family member, and you do not go to them and either help them or provide some wisdom to them, or you haven't gone over to lift them up to help them in some way or another. What is that? It's sin. I will give you an example because to this day it's a shame for me. I was in church one day walking down the aisle and I felt the strong urging, you need to go talk to this guy. Okay, God, I will. Ends up, and I found out later on, the gentleman was involved in a bunch of stuff. He was working at the fire department at the time, ended up cheating on his wife, and they ended up getting divorced. Had I addressed it in the beginning, do I know that it would have changed? No. Was there the possibility? Yes. And if God had directed me to that, could the outcome have been different? The answer is potentially. Now it's up to him to take what I've given or what God has told me to give and to use it. And to this day, it bugs me as to whether or not that would have made a difference. But that is an obvious sin of omission, not doing what I felt God telling me to do. Now, in the same vein of that, doing what God has told me to do, and I've gotten strong promptings. One is driving down a street in the Netherlands about 9 o'clock at night. It was already dark outside. It had been raining. The roads were slick. And we were about to turn. We were going to stop and then turn into our housing division where we lived at there. We rented a house there at the time. And as I got to that and I was about to turn, I heard stop. I put the brakes on and I was almost stopped and my wife smacks me. She goes, we need to stop. I said, I know, I heard already. About that time, two teenagers had come rolling through there, drunk as a skunk, hit the side of the things. They have to be 18 or older to drive there. They had hit a tree. They flipped the car up and it slid right through the intersection. Guess who would have been on that side of the car as I turned into the left? Now that is something that I did that I heard a distinct push, stop. I literally heard the word. My wife heard the word. She said, stop. I heard something says stop. And then that thing runs through. Well, that is an act of commission, not a sin. It's a good thing I did that God saved me from because I listened to him. And I sincerely believe it was God because there was no other way that it could have saved my life.
That was a good example because my dad would do that a lot when I was growing up. And I learned to trust my dad, even though I didn't want to. There'd be many times I'd ask my dad in high school because I could drive, can I go over here? And he's like, I don't feel right about it. And I just would say, okay. I mean, yeah, I really wanted to go, but I already knew because I'd seen it, and then sure enough, you hear it on the news, there was an accident on the road that I would have been taking. And I'm like, well, thank you, God. Thank you,
When
God.
we are in a rush to get somewhere and we're just chomping at the bit and irritated because everything has slowed us down, do we ever stop for just a moment to think that maybe that's God's way of preserving our life? And I actually have thought that before. I don't do it often enough, obviously, because I get impatient too.
Hit every red light.
You hit every man, it drives me nuts. The donkey, Balaam's donkey.
Perspective instead of, man, I hit it like God saved me from like 15 things.
And you didn't even know it.
Didn't even know it, huh?
But here's the deal. When you go to the doctor, you get diagnosed with some illness. When you go to God, the diagnosis is broken by sin. Okay? The medicine from the doctor is the cure to whatever illness to help our body to recover from that. Here is the medicine for us from God. Do you know what it is? Blood of Jesus Christ on the cross at Calvary. That is the absolute cure for sin. Okay, so we've covered the first one. Sin is two things. The number one is the failure to do or not do something. Number two, it's a condition. It is a state of rebellion. Anybody here a rebel? I don't expect you to hold your hands up, but I'm gonna hold both of mine up. I'm a rebel.
I don't know if that.
When somebody stands in my way and keeps me from doing what I want to do, I get bent out of shape.
That's me.
When I find something that I want to do and I want to do it, and I'm getting better in my old age. But I will tell you, recently I had this thing in the back of my head. If I get this truck and I trade my truck for it, then I can pull it with the RV. I can go four-wheeling. I can go do this and do all of this. And then I look at the cost, and God goes, "That's not what I have designed for you. That's not what I want you to do." I'm like, "Hey, God." Not the right attitude still, but submission to his will. Well, why? Because it's going to put me in a different financial state. I don't want to be there. But it's a state of rebellion. Could I go and do that? Could I get that truck anyway? Absolutely. I have the financial capability to go and get it, but it's not going to benefit me in the long run, and it's going to harm. And God knows that. And so I look at that payment and I'm like, nope, not today. So
I hear you, brother.
Ministry opportunities.
Yeah.
Just to have that year 7.
yeah, absolutely.
Do something else.
I was reading on the site the other day. In fact, I think it was on Fox News, where this doctor and his family were out at a restaurant in Fort Worth. I think it was Mimi's Cafe. They have one or had one here in Albuquerque for a while. But they're at Mimi's Cafe. Him and his 3 kids and his wife are there, and he's just doting on his kids, and the kids are just behaving beautifully. And some guy over behind him sees what's going on, doesn't say a word, doesn't say who he is, doesn't want any recognition. He goes to the front and pays for that guy's bill. And he said that just restored, you've heard it before, restored my faith in humanity. Well, why? Because that gentleman had the capability financially to benefit. How many times can we do that and we don't have to get the recognition for it, but we can bless people if we stay within God's will and stay within our financial means. So those are good things, right? What is sin? It is an act or a failure instigated by a person in passion, a thought, or a desire. All of those, when we act or we fail to act on something, and sometimes our passions, now let me define that a little bit further. Sometimes our passions drive us to sin. You ever absolutely hated somebody? You know what Jesus said that was? Is murder. Have you ever looked at something and wanted it so badly that you were looking at ways, that truck, that you could find to get it? Well, what is that? It's covetousness. And it ends up leading to irresponsibility, sin, following something that's not God's will. You want to play the Xbox so bad that you go in your brother's room and you play it when you know you're not supposed to. What is that? It's covetousness that led to sin. So we look at all of these things. Hatred equals murder. Lust of another person equals adultery. That's what Jesus said. Coveting equals theft. So all of these things go, and what are the consequences? That's the thing. What are the
We
consequences?
still try to weigh our sins.
We still try to weigh it, right? But does God? Sin is sin is sin, right? What is the punishment for sin? The wages of sin is what? You just said it.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
Yeah.
death. And so when Adam sinned, the biggest impact is that every human being, until Jesus returns and fixes everything, results in what? Death. What is the rate of human mortality today? 100%.
guaranteed.
I tease my kids every time we drive by a cemetery. I said, everybody's dying to get in there. I don't know what's up with that. And they go, the first time they were like, they had to think about it and then they laughed. After that, now they're like, Dad. So, let me give you an example of something that can lead to death. It leads us to typically sin more. And I'm going to use it as an illustration. Let's say you've gone up Tomei Hill, for example, and there's this big rock up there. And you've got this idea, hey, I'm not supposed to move this rock, but, there's this plant under the edge of that. Maybe I should just dig that up and I can take that plant home. What have you done to the base of that rock on the downhill side where you start to dig that out?
Weakened it.
You've weakened it. There you go. And that's just one little sin, right? It's just a little white lie. I wasn't really stealing anything. Those plants are everywhere. I'm just going to take this one, right?
Now your plants.
And then you get on the other side of that rock and you can see some roots going under the other side. And you try to dig, but it's solid rock. You can't get to that plant to get it out. And you're like, if I just reach down and I lift that rock just a little bit, I can pull that plant out, right? And then I've got two plants, not one, but my covetousness, I got to have that plant. There's tons of them everywhere else. I could go get those plants somewhere else, but that one is the one I want. And so you lift that rock a little bit. Now what you done?
5 no.
What's that?
5 no.
5 is now what? 5 is now a 4.
No.
Oh, well, I didn't say Los Lunas. I said Tomei. Oh, same difference. Okay, so you've removed that rock, and now the 5 is a 4. But let's say you disturb that other side first, and then now you've tilted that rock a little bit. What's it going to start doing?
Landslide.
It's going to start to roll. What happens if that rock starts rolling down? What if that rock is, say, 500 or 600 pounds, and you want to run around to the other side? Get to it real quick. You might be able to stop it before it rolls over, and you could push it back a little bit, maybe if you had some help. But if that thing starts to roll and it gets some momentum, what happens? Destruction. And if you get in front of it, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
It's going to run you over and squish you. It's going to lead to death. All because you wanted that little plant that was on one side or the other and you started messing with it. Did you know that our addictions start that way? I'll just use an example because I smoked when I was really young for about 3 months. Oh, yeah. You're looking at me in horror. I was a stupid teenager. So, and it's still on my medical records today because I admitted to it. And I'm like, take it out. I don't smoke. But what happens with people who are addicted to nicotine? It's just that one to start with, right?
Can't get enough of that.
Is it because everybody else is so cool? I got to be cool like them. That was how I was thinking. And I thought, I'm going to be like Watson and Sherlock and Holmes. I'm going to get a pipe. It smell good. I figured I'd smoke it. It'd be cool. I'd be cool, right? Was I cool? No. Do you know what it did? It damaged my body. When I left Marine Corps Basic, and even after that, for months afterwards, I could run a flat out 6-minute mile sustained for 3 miles. I could run 3 miles in 18 minutes. Now, for somebody like Tom, that's not significant because he's faster than that. But for me, that was something, right? Do you know what happened after smoking for just a month? I dropped like 3 minutes off my run time. So now instead of running a 6-minute mile, I'm running a 7-minute mile. Instead of 18 minutes, I'm finishing at 21 minutes. How do you think that made me feel? Because now I'm behind everybody else in my platoon that's rocking it, right? I used to run out in front of everybody. Now I'm kind of in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Do you know what I did when I got back to my dorm room after figuring that out?
Throw 'em away.
I threw everything away and I didn't do it again. So it was just an impulse thing, but that potential could have led to an addiction that would have lasted the rest of my life. Could have damaged I might have been dead already. Think about it for just a moment. Sin is like that. It doesn't start usually with big things. It starts with the little things. Somebody says something to you that just upsets you. And so you start to let that churn in your head and you keep going and going and going until eventually it turns into hate. Hate, you run into that person, you already hate them, something's going on, you've got a knife or a gun in your pocket. What do? I'm going to shank you, buddy. What happens? Now hate has led to murder. And it doesn't take that much. As much as we think it is, it doesn't take that much. Have I ever hated? Yes, I have. Do I know it's wrong and have I confessed it? Absolutely. Have I asked God to forgive me? Absolutely. Have I asked that person to forgive me? Absolutely. But it doesn't change the fact that that damage is already done. Yeah. So sin, number one, is the things that we do or do not do. Number two, it is what? Let's go back there.
Be careful being you.
It's a condition. It's a state of rebellion. And it's a result of the fall. So as we're going through all of this and we're looking at this, once we develop habits, they're like a rock rolling down a hill. Almost impossible to stop and even more difficult to return back to the place where it all started at. So it can result in a whole lot of different things. Christianity says this: death is a result of what? Sin. By one man, death entered the world. Who was that one man? Adam. Why was it Adam? He wasn't the one that picked the fruit.
Firsthand.
He was the one who was spiritually responsible. God put him in charge. Now he had a helpmate, someone to stand alongside him to share the load, to do the stuff with him. But the Bible doesn't say by one woman death entered the world. It says by one man. That's important to remember. Why is that? And it's the leader of the family. And it's supposed to be that way. So Christianity says death is a result of sin. What's the cure?
Jesus.
Jesus is the cure. And that's the thing that gets me. Once we develop habits, they're like that rock we talked about, almost impossible to stop. Sin, really, that's just kind of a simple explanation of sin and how we develop habits and we get through stuff. Human mortality rate, we've already discussed, 100%. Christianity says that death is a result of sin, Romans chapter 6 and verse 23. And then the cure for sin, It's Jesus. What does Paul say in Romans chapter 10, starting in verse 9? For if you believe in your heart that Jesus died and that he rose again, it doesn't say that exactly. That's Corey paraphrasing. And you confess with your mouth, you will be what? Saved. Now, when Paul uses that word believe, and we're going to talk about it next week, what does he mean by that? And that's something that we're going to examine in depth. So I hope that will draw you back and you'll want to know more about it. So we're going to talk about faith next week. Questions, thoughts, ideas? We're tired of listening to you go away. Oh, thanks. That hurt.
The idea of child baptism, because that's a solution that has been presented to absolve us from the fact, well, because if a child wanted to sin,
Yeah.
and he doesn't, and he dies or she dies before a certain time, that's why it has been developed.
Do you know the origin of that? The origin of infant baptism started around 325 AD, right around the time of the Council of Nicaea, and actually was talked about there. It wasn't implemented at that point. But the idea of it was that it was a covenant between the child, the parents, and God. That they would raise that child to know about God originally. It developed into we go and we baptize them to make sure that they're saved. But that's not the way it was intended. It was intended to be a covenant between the child, the parents, and God to raise them away so that they would know God. And so it's interesting to me to watch how that developed over time, to read through those. And yeah, and the Catholic Church today will tell you, well, if you weren't baptized in the church, you can't go to heaven. But that is just an act. It's a physical act, something we do. So I find it interesting because I've talked to a lot of people about it. And I said, if that's the case, then why does it say that we have to make a choice? And a child at that age cannot make that choice.
Well, I mean, again, we're going to kind of talk about it in the sermon today too,
Yeah.
but like that's the perfect situation about what causes division. I mean, the simple answer to your question is,
Right.
well, what does the Bible say about infant baptism?
Right.
It doesn't say about infant baptism. But man decided that they needed to put terms on it, and then it created the vibe that's still going on today.
A solution that solves a problem in their mind.
In their mind, yeah,
Their mind.
but not in reality.
Right, true. But that's the thing about it. So there's an age. And it,
I think it's a great thing if it's used in the right way.
well, like
As long as it's not.
say you can't get saved if you're 3
Right.
years old, just because you want to get saved, it's not possible. Others say you can't get saved until you're, or you can. It's that where that age is doesn't seem to be established.
My mother would argue with you about it.
I'm sure.
And the reason why is because at 3 years old, I watched the change of my mother and my father when they came to know Christ. And I told my mom, I want that too. And so I knelt down with her and prayed. Now, did I understand? No. And so at the age of
but
8,
again, not
at 8,
to interrupt
then
you.
I did come
Like
to that.
you get people that are getting baptized at 30, 40, and 50, and they don't
Still
understand.
don't understand. Yep.
So what's
You're right.
right?
Yeah.
Where does the Bible say? What is the age of accountability? It's a
Yeah.
Jewish thing, right?
Yeah.
They came up. I'm not even sure that I can think of a mandate in the Old Testament that specifically calls it out. So
It doesn't.
therefore,
It's tradition.
again, it's a tradition.
Yeah. Well, and we could go into a whole bunch of that and we could create more division, but I won't. So a lot of interesting stuff. And you learn about it when you talk about theology. And when we talk about it, then people, what I live for is to watch the light bulb come on. If I do that and I watch somebody go, oh, it's made my day. That's what it is. And if I can help, and I'll be honest with you, there are still times that I'm reading through stuff and I'm reading through it. I just read through Job again and I read it for I don't know how many different times. I read through it again and I went, Oh, now I get it. It's not that I couldn't quote some parts of Job to you and I couldn't tell you the story about what happened, but I didn't understand the purpose behind it until I dug deeper. That's what theology is about. So, would you pray for us?
Dear God, we pray today, we pray for you, God. Pray have a good rest of the day. Learn more about you, your person, good.
Yes.
Okay.